So I'm really pleased to introduce Peter King, Dr. Peter King, sorry, from Leeds. He's an economist, and Peter and I actually worked together during my postdoc at Reading, which I finished last year. And he is going to talk to us today about Beequest value, which is stated preferences for insect-provided cultural ecosystem services. So over to you, Peter. Thank you.
Cheers. Yeah, it's always nice to get introduced with your title. It's one of the things that kind of wears off after your Viva. But yeah, I guess I did my PhD a while ago. Yeah, Tree and I worked a lot on this. The Druid project, which was NERC funded, and it was a blast. You know, we had a lot of fun doing non-standard insecty stuff. Right. So a lot of you are going to be like, oh, it's going to be about pollination. It's going to be about this thing. But we're going to do this talk specifically is about the weirdest stuff. It's about non-use values of insects. And I think it's going to be fun. It's called Beequest specifically, and you'll find out why at the end. So I've got about half an hour, but you know, if you do have questions now or afterwards, you know, put them in the slide, or you can just email me directly. My email address is there at the bottom of the screen. And if you hate anything about this talk or you love anything about this talk, there's an anonymous feedback form. You can chuck in anything you like. So last year, before Tree joined JNCC, we asked 1,600 people in the UK, what do you think of insects? I hate things like snakes, insects, gators, slugs. Let them all die, who cares? It's difficult to answer as I live in a flat in the middle of a city with barely no contact with insects. I hate wasps. I avoid beetles. I take every chance I get to save bees. And if you want 1,683 more of those type of responses, let me know. But I just thought this is such an interesting provocation, right? We kind of have these, and I promise these real texts that people put in our survey. And they're just these really interesting perspectives on, you know, do people identify what insects are? You know, do they know that a gator isn't an insect? Does it matter if they interact with these insects? You know, if they're in urban settings, how does preferences vary between these type of insects? And then do they, you know, love, hate, interact, whatever? So I just think that's such an interesting provocation. And I promise you there's a point to putting these up. So, as I said, a lot of people know that insects do things, right? They pollinate crops. Work Tree and I did was on pest regulation. So that was on, you know, insects eat crop pests, and that's economically meaningful. But something else that insects do, all insects, is this kind of cultural services. And by that, I'm talking about more non-material things, right? And we can call them benefits here. We can call them values. And there's certainly this sense that insects provide things like use values, you know, recreationally, you might go and see a butterfly house, or aesthetically, you might want to see some bees to show you that it's summer and they're kind of around your flowers. But one thing I was particularly interested in this work is about their non-use. And non-use are really interesting. Non-use values are values about not using insects, right? So the kind of standard paradigm is, oh, I interact with an insect and I like it or I don't like it, and I'd be willing to pay for that or I wouldn't. But when we were kind of pre-testing and thinking about what do insects do culturally, the big thing was this kind of non-use of insects. You know, so I'm going to today split it into two things. I'm going to split it into existence value, and I'm going to split it into bequest value. And I can give you the definitions, I can give you all of this stuff, but essentially existence is this kind of, I don't want to see that insect, I don't like that insect, but I don't want it to not exist. So it's kind of tied up in like an extinction risk, are kind of divorced from the use of it. It's explicitly not using it. And then we contrast that existence value with bequest. So I don't want to see that insect, but I would like future generations to have the ability to see that insect, or not see that insect, but I would like future generations to have that choice. Right? So it's implicitly, I'm not using it, my generation's not using it, but someone in the future might want to use it. And I think it's important for that. So already within the kind of cultural services of insects, we have some kind of use values. So people go out to use these insects or interact with them. And we have two very interesting non-use values. And all the way through this talk, I've got it on every slide at the top. It's going to be about bequest value and existence value of insects. And I'm going to tell you why I think that's important. So just in case it's interesting to, people in the kind of history of these values, where they come from, what do they mean? There's been a lot of kind of post-war thought about, should we be willing to pay for something to exist, even if you don't use it, even if you don't interact with it? And there's a handful of papers on, should I be willing to pay for deep sea coral? I'm not going to use it. I have no chance of using it, but I might value the fact that it exists. And really, this kind of Loomis paper is about that. Existence value is the value of a non-used good during your lifetime. And maybe it's altruistic, maybe it's self-oriented, maybe it's an intrinsic value, but that's essentially it, right? Existence is, I am willing to pay for the existence of this thing, regardless of me using it. Now, as I said, I'm really interested in juxtaposing that existence value with bequest. So originally, bequest value was more of a motivation, right? It was, I'm willing to pay for something to exist so I can bequest it to future generations. But kind of later on thought, a bit more contemporary, is kind of grew that as its own category. And now we have a bit more kind of understanding that it is this, altruistic, kind of other-oriented kind of value about, it's not about me ever using it. It's not even about other people now using it. It's about explicit bequests to the future, right? So I think that's really interesting in terms of not just insects, but any natural capital, really, in that I might use that thing or not use that thing, or I might value its existence or I might not. But I also might want future generations to have that, right? We might just be custodians of things right now and then want our children or our children's children or our friends and family or whatever to have that ability to know nature the same way as we do. So I think existence and bequest are really important aspects of value, right? I think there are certainly people out there who hate wasps and hate bees and beetles and whatever else, but they don't want them to go to extinct, right? So you're probably thinking, wow, that makes a lot of sense. I'm sure interested in the future. What else has been done? And I've got some bad news. Most studies haven't done it well. Most studies, and I've got a list. I didn't really fancy putting loads of text on the slide, but I got a list of all the studies that just say, we measure existence and bequest value. And they bundle it. They just say that the value of something existing now is tied up in the value of something existing for the future. But there are a few studies that have tried to separately kind of estimate those, but just imperfectly, right? So I've got 3 examples there of developing countries where it's really tied up in the kind of cultural use of these environments. These aren't insects, these are just kind of more on, tribal, cultural, historical use of land. But the point remains that people usually do have some preference for intergenerational conservation, right? They have some sort of attitude, preference, well-being for leaving something for the future. And I don't think that's been recognized correctly. And I don't think that's, and I think that's something that's really important for understanding why we want to conserve something and preferences for that. So we're interested in the existence and bequest of these insects. Insects are just a kind of focal study here. That project's about insects, but obviously this can generalize. And as I said, we have 1,600 people. And what I'm going to do methodologically is I'm going to try and separate existence and bequest. And I'm going to do it in both willingness to pay terms, and I'm going to do it in non-monetary terms. So if you don't like commoditizing nature or the kind of monetization, don't worry. I've got a non-monetary measure. I've got well-being measures in there. And I think it's going to be really interesting using these different methods to show different things. So really important thing for me is just to acknowledge everyone who's helped. So University of Leeds, Research Computing, Survey Engine, fantastic company. If you need market research, go hit them up. And all the replication code is publicly available. If it's something missing on there, that's my fault. Just email me. And the data is, I would put the data available, but we're waiting till it's go through peer review first. So it will be publicly available stuff. And you can count those 1,600 dots there. I don't think that's a good use of your time, but you can see where we got our respondents. Mostly in the kind of big cities, but we've got a real array of responses in Great Britain. So we're 10 minutes in, and I want you to remember 3 things from today. I want you to remember that existence and bequest are not the same. People have distinct preferences for them. They're not the same. They mean different things, and people recognize that. I want you to take away that preferences for insects are so much more varied than we think, right? It's not love bees, hate wasps. It's not some people love insects, some people hate insects. It's really complex. It's really, really strange. And I'm going to give you some graphs that show just how heterogeneous it is. And thirdly, last takeaway that I think is really interesting to yourselves at JNCC is there is a link between the well-being people derive from insects and their willingness to support, and actually I could write it more strongly as willingness to pay for these kind of intergenerational, longer-term conservation measures, right? So we're not just looking at, do people support conservation, yes or no? We're looking at, are people willing to support conservation long-term as well, so ultra long-term, intergenerational. So I've kept this slide in from another talk. You don't actually have to go and do it. I can make the slides available later, but if you want a sneak preview into our results, you can go to that link. It's actually on my website as well if you find that, but this link's publicly available. You can put in some data. It doesn't store the data. You can do whatever you like. And then you can see how your responses, how your preferences for the non-use of insects compare to the public that we have. If you're looking for something to do on lunch, looking for something to do, or you want to show your friends, or you want to understand how you'll kind of relate to other people in the country on insects, go to that link. You won't regret it. But it is kind of long. It's 11 well-being questions. So just aware, it's a bit more than 2 minutes. So if you go to that link, what you'll find is our attempt to get people's well-being from the existence and bequest of insects. And to do that, what we did was use a scale that's already been tested, it's already been validated, You can go to that website, you can go to Kate Irvine's paper in Journal of Environmental Psychology, and you could see that that's tested in the field, it's validated, it's correct, it's meaningful. And what it is a visual analog scale. And we put in a STEM question. So the number of living things in this woodland makes me feel. That's how it was originally piloted. And then the 5 rows, physically relaxed, joyful, clear-minded. These are different aspects of well-being, right? So we're going to get people's kind of responses to different aspects of well-being. And then we're going to take the mean over that and call that people's well-being per this statement. So we use a well-being scale that looks like this. So we're not reinventing the wheel here. We're not changing things massively. All we're doing to get at people's well-being from insects, or from the use and non-use of these insects, is saying that is having a STEM question up here, and we're going to have 1 each for the use, existence, and bequest values. And then I'm going to repeat those statements per different insects. So in this survey, what we do is just look at bees and wasps. Bees are kind of really well known. They're probably the most focal insect. Really positive framing for most people. And wasps are just the complete opposite. People really hate wasps, and kind of there is that stereotype. And then to benchmark against bees and wasps, we've got ground beetles, and you know, beetles are really diverse. So we just pick ground beetles. We know that they do pest regulation services, so there's kind of an external reason we've got them. But we've got them in here just to say, as a benchmark, you know, compared to beetles, do people get more well-being from wasps, or do they get more well-being from bees? And I'm not going to show you one beetle. We actually pick 3, you know, kind of exemplar species. It doesn't particularly matter which one is which. If you want to know which one is which, please email me. But it doesn't really matter. All we're doing is just saying, hey, beetles kind of look like this. What well-being do you get from knowing that you can encounter these beetles when you're outside? As I said, we're going to look at 5 dimensions of well-being. This is quite a long history of that. It doesn't matter so much what they are and how they're worded, but 5 dimensions of well-being. We just sum across and take a kind of Gestalt well-being measure. And it's really easy. You know, if you go to the shiny link that I shared, it's really easy. You just go and drag the scale across and then show where you land on it. No right answers, no wrong answers. It's just, what well-being do you get from these? So here is 1,684 responses to those well-being scales. And I know that picture's probably really blown up on your screen. Just go to the shiny link. Just go back to that link. You'll see yourself plotted on this graph. And it's just, you know, so I was really pleased when this came out. I think I must have emailed Tree and Tom and everyone else. But if we assume that the left-hand side of the x-axis is low well-being, and we assume that the right-hand side is high well-being, then you can see that the kind of distribution of responses, we've got histograms here, but I can plot the means with the kind of the dots. We can see across these responses that bees give people more well-being than beetles, more than wasps. And more interestingly for this talk, we can see that bequest gives people more well-being than existence value, which gives people more well-being than a kind of use value. I will go into how we define bequest existence and encountering in this circumstance, but I just think this is one of the main takeaways from the talk. Bequest is really important, more so than just kind of a non-use value, and perhaps more so than in encountering. So again, bequest and existence are not the same, and it's going to vary by insect. So that's our non-monetary side. We get well-being from people using a really validated scale, and we just show that existence and bequest are not the same thing, but that people do derive well-being from the bequest of these insects. But I'm an economist, right? My PhD was economics, and I want a kind of more formal way of expressing that well-being in a monetized way. So we're going to use a choice experiment. The survey is publicly available online. It's on my GitHub. And here we explain to our 1,684 respondents that if there was a hypothetical plan to conserve insect populations, what choices would they make? And then from that, I'll show you how we get at existence, bequest, and use values. So we kind of, we annotate this to them and show, hey, look, there's a plan A and B, and there's also a kind of no change current scenario. And we're going to, in each task, we're going to show it's either bees, beetles, or wasps. This is the exact same as the well-being scale. We're not doing anything differently. We're showing the same insects, the same groups. And then these hypothetical plans, if you're not familiar with choice experiments, it's a really simple method. It's just, hypothetically, would you prefer A, B, or C? And those are going to vary along some attributes. And one of the attributes we look at is a kind of use value, where are you willing to pay to encounter this insect? Just leave that hang as a kind of interesting provocation. And then, we find ways to motivate this and justify it and explain it. And in the end, we kind of said, if you chose this plan and were willing to pay for it, then there would be more area managed near you, through wildflower meadows, through urban planting, through hedgerows, whatever it is, so that you can encounter insects now. Right? So the most important attribute for now here is, are you willing to pay to encounter this insect? So that's our use value. To contrast, just as we do in the well-being scale, we also have an existence value. Right, so are you willing to pay for this insect to exist now, even if you can't see it? And we really explicitly, you might not be able to read all the text there, you can see it publicly on the GitHub. We really explicitly rule out use. We really say you can't use these insects, you can't see them, you can't interact with them, you won't encounter them, but you will know that they exist. Right? So are you willing to pay for this thing to exist, even if you can't use it? And then finally, obviously, we've got a bequest value as, again, contrast. How does use value compare to bequest? How does existence compare to bequest? Can we separate those? And we say, you can't use this insect. It's not near you. And in fact, it won't even start until after, much, much later on. It's going to be really long term. We explicitly say in the future. And we just say, are you willing to pay for future generations to have the ability to interact with that insect if they want? Or future generations to never interact with that insect, just for them to know that it exists? So conceptually, a little bit complex. I think, if you have that in the survey, and you're welcome to do the survey, I can send you it, or you can find it on the GitHub. I think conceptually, if you do that, you have to really think, well, I do want future generations to know that wasps exist. But how much am I willing to pay for that? And is that more important than them existing now? Or is that more important than me being able to encounter them? So we do a pretty standard, kind of, are you willing to pay an income tax? And in the end, it looks like this. So again, we've got some really beautiful illustrations. That's from Olson's Small Woodland Creatures. And we're not showing one type of wasp. We're just showing, exemplar species. And we asked our 1,600 respondents to kind of go through and say, which plan do you prefer, A, B, or C? There's no right or wrong. There's no preferred. Just which would you choose? And which would you be willing to pay for? And from doing this task, we're going to get a monetized willingness to pay for existence value, for bequest value, for use value. So before we do the choice experiment, and I'm going to show you everything we get from the choice experiment, I just really like including these extra results. So the survey starts with, when you hear the word insect, could you name the first three that come to mind? And the astute among you will notice that our second most common insect is a spider. No entomologists ask about that, please. And you can see there's so many different things here, but we have bees, we have wasps, we have beetles. But in future, ants would be massively worthwhile doing, flies, and then all these other types of insects. But more worryingly, or perhaps more interestingly, we then asked, when you hear the word insect, which three words come to mind? And I think this will go some way to explaining our results from the choice experiment. So one of the major words is creepy. And in fact, let me present it not like this. Let me present it like this. And you can see that almost all the words used, a huge amount of the words used, are kind of negative valence, annoying, scary, pests, gross, disgusting. And then actually comparatively fewer words are used for kind of positive feelings, happy, useful, good. It's interesting that useful's in there, trying to tie up perceptions of insects where they're kind of used to us as humans, aside from their existence. So I don't really think we have time to do the quiz. If you want to do the quiz, go and find the survey on my GitHub or email me or do the survey. But we again, the reason this is here is to understand, what do people know about insects already? And how does that affect their use, existence, and bequest value? So I don't think this is an economics audience. If it is, send me a question. I would love to talk about this. The code is publicly available. You can find all the results and supporting data and the survey on my GitHub. It's right there. If something's not available, it will be shortly. But what we're going to do is we're going to do a relatively complex model to understand the respondents we have. And then that's going to show us what people are willing to pay for the use, existence, and bequest values. So what do we find? We plot here the kind of distribution of the mean willingness to pay. It's really, really specific. I know it's too small, but I'm going to break that down. But the key thing I want you to take away with, remember at the start, three things: existence and bequest are different, preferences are really heterogeneous, and well-being is important. This is the second point. Preferences are really heterogeneous. So because we use the latent class model, it's just a relatively simple statistic method that predicts kind of what classes of preferences people would be in, and it says 42% of our respondents, so that's a couple hundred, we'll call them pro-insect. And you can see on the right here why I call them pro-insect. The y-axis is the willingness to pay per year. And it shows that for bees and beetles and wasps, people who were pro-insect, that's 40% of our sample, were willing to pay for all these services. And look, existence isn't the same as bequest. Bequest isn't the same as encountering. And you can see there's insect-specific differences. So what do we have here? The largest proportion of our sample were willing to pay for the use and non-use of insects. These people they're mostly younger. For every 1 year increase in age, you're less likely to be in this class. But interestingly, it's also people who say they're involved in citizen science. People who go out and do recording or, all those different apps and measures. Those people who are involved, they're willing to pay for use and non-use of insects across all the insects we have here. A bit more of a well-trodden story is that a lot of our respondents were insect averse. And I'll tell you a story about this, right? When I joined the Druid project, I said to my sister, the insects are going extinct and they're under threat and their populations are reducing. And she said, good riddance. And she would solidly be in this class of insect averse respondents. It's about a quarter of our sample. It's mostly female respondents, and some of those who kind of have some skepticism about the survey. But I call them insect averse because look how negative this willingness to pay is. It's negative across encountering, existence, and bequest. And it's negative across bees, beetles, wasps. And what we find is that about a quarter of our sample were not going to pay anything for these insects. They don't like them. They find that what they do disservices. They don't get any benefits from that. And lastly, the remaining, say, third of our sample, I call them ambivalent. Right, and you can see why. This is just the kind of mean willingness to pay. So I can report them as a distribution if you prefer. But essentially, the people who have mixed preferences, maybe they like bees, but they hate wasps, or maybe they're willing to pay for beetles, but not wasps. Maybe it depends on the class. But these people are really, really ambivalent, right? So about a third of respondents are contextual. They might be willing to pay for use values, but maybe not for non-use values. So as I said, our second key thing I want you to remember is that love bees, hate wasps is way, way too simple. Preferences for insects are very heterogeneous. And in fact, you can see here on the right, I'll share the slides, they can be available. This is the kind of distribution of willingness to pay. And you can see that even for classes that are really pro-insect, there's still tails of that distribution that overlap zero. But again, things are not so simple, right? Things are not, oh, I love bees or I love bequest value. It's really kind of contextual and complex. And the third result I wanted to talk to you guys about, which I think was a really interesting one, and kind of links back to what we're doing about the wellbeing scale, is I have these 1,600 people's reported wellbeing from insects, and I have their choice experiment responses, and I model the interaction between the two. So I say, if you derive more well-being from current insect populations, if you derive more well-being from knowing that bees, beetles, wasps exist now or exist in the future, what I show on the right is that positively increases willingness to pay. And that's contextual on the insect and the use value and the class. But just what I thought was super interesting was for this class of people, this kind of third of the sample who's ambivalent, if they derive more well-being from current insect populations, they might change their preferences from negative to positive and thus support this kind of intergenerational conservation a bit more, right? So if you look at the bequest column, you can see that people who kind of derive a standard deviation higher well-being are then willing to pay a bit more for bequest value. So that's the three things I said, right? Existence and bequest are different, preferences are heterogeneous, and well-being makes a difference. So it's been a pretty whistle-stop tour of a really large, pretty complex survey. The survey's at my GitHub. You can email me if you want a copy or any questions, really open about that. And we find three things. Existence and bequest are different values. They're different values in well-being terms. They're different values in willingness to pay terms. People know that. We find that preferences are really heterogeneous. That we group them as three different classes: pro-insect, insect-averse, ambivalent. But even within those classes, there's heterogeneity. And thirdly, well-being makes a difference. People who derive higher well-being from insects might be willing to pay more for existence value, for bequest value, and we can interpret that in terms of support for longer-term conservation measures. So just to, if you have any thoughts on the presentation materials or style or me or the project or whatever, you can either email them or you can do them anonymously. I didn't know there was an animation. But yeah, that's all from me today. Get in touch with me if you want trees available. Your very own JNCC rep. Tom Breeze at Reading and Martin Dallamer at Imperial as well really contributed to this, and thanks to them. So thanks for your time and looking forward to some questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. That was really interesting, even though I know some of the background already. Sophie has messaged to say she's having difficulties with her laptop, so I'm going to take over doing the questions from her. Sure. We've had a few questions come in, so you've still got, anyone in the call, you've still got a few minutes to get questions in if you'd like to ask Peter anything while he's still here. So I'm just going to go through them in order. The first one's from me, and it's not a question, it's just a comment that I'm really concerned about the gator person.
Yeah,
really worried about that.
Yeah. Let's see if we can find them again. I don't understand. I mean, what I don't understand is they said gators, but they didn't put gators on there. Well, you know what? Maybe gators only got one entry instead of hundreds.
Yeah. I mean, also, I think that might not have been a UK person because that's not a standard UK way of any word usage. Anyway, that was one of my sort of initial.
But I mean, that's why we had them up there. There's a lot of really interesting comments. And I think and we have these questions later on. Can you even identify an insect? Do you know what insects these are? Yeah. That's not right or wrong. It's just saying people might not have a great idea of, what insects they're valuing or they're considering. But I don't think it matters so much.
That leads me on slightly to the next question, which is, did your survey only use bumblebee images for the bee questions? It would be interesting to see a difference with honeybees, as some people mistake them for other insects.
Sure. Yeah. Do we have a picture of bees anywhere?
I think it was at the top of one of the question slides.
Yeah, that's there, kind of,
yeah.
No, I didn't use that one. I kind of updated it after that. Well, that's a shame. It's no, it wasn't only bumblebees. I wrote it down the other day. There was one Bombus Pretorum, there was Apis mellifera, there was one other which I forgot. But I think the question's right, that I'm not sure people can delineate between them. So we try and show these different type of things. I'm not catching anyone out. I'm not saying, oh, it's actually a mimic or it's actually a wasp or whatever. But I did want to show that, bees don't look uniform. They can look different, especially for the wasps as well. That was really weird one. But if you go to the survey on my GitHub, you will be able to find what the bees look like.
I'm guessing if you just showed people the ruby-tailed wasp there, they're going to have a very different response to that, aren't they, than if they see what they think of as a classic wasp.
We think so. But that's why we showed the spread of things, just so, kind of this generalized idea of what wasps can look like.
Yes.
What's your well-being from that? But
the next question is valuing insects for their existence considered intrinsic value, and is bequest intrinsic or extrinsic as it estimates future value to others?
Well, this is a very interesting question, right? And I've been wrestling with that, especially. So sorry, I'm trying to find exactly what I wrote. So existence value, I think, is a kind of more intrinsic thing. I think it's very much about, I just know that exists and I feel good about that. And I think that's a bit more clear-cut. Whereas the bequest, I find such a difficult concept to kind of wrap my head around sometimes, in terms of, is it a bequest of use values or is it a bequest of non-use values? There is some intrinsic nature to it, right? In terms of, I can't use it and I will never use it, but I feel good knowing that exists for the future. I feel good that as a custodian, I've left that for the future. Is it extrinsic because so the question was worded as extrinsic because you're leaving benefits to the future?
Value to others, yeah.
It kind of depends what bequest, right? Because it could be bequest of non-use values, in which case those people aren't using it at all. But I guess you're bequesting to their existence values, so maybe it's extrinsic.
Yeah.
It's still to do with you, right? It's still intrinsic to, I feel good because someone else is having that. More reading needed, maybe. But there's a lot of interesting work on kind of a bit more conceptually on those type of values.
Next question is, people's willingness to pay is often used to derive value in nature, but how many people who say they are willing actually are and do, for example, buy NGO memberships?
Yeah, I feel like I know who asked this question as well. I've heard it a lot. And I think one of the important things for us was to show that even across different measures, then it doesn't matter, right? So, we show this well-being stuff, which is fascinating. And we showed that, actually, I'll upload the results. We show that even in this, where it's non-binding, that you don't have to pay, that you don't have to do anything, we kind of recover similar preferences, right? We kind of show that there are people on the left-hand tail who are super low well-being. There's people on the right-hand tail who are super high well-being. And then there's diversity within that. So I think even in a scenario where it's explicitly non-binding, non-payment, we have similar results. And then the question is actually about theoretical kind of validity of these monetary measures.
Yes.
We do a lot in the survey, and if you go and read the survey, you'll keep finding bits where we're like, you would have to pay this, and your responses are important, and it's actually a plan that's being considered. And we do a lot. We do everything we can in the survey to make it as consequential as possible, but we don't have their bank details, right? So we can't bind.
Yes.
We follow we do as best as we can, but the question asker, I'm sure that's a better term for that the person who's asking the question is correct, that this is a problem to all these kind of valuation studies.
Yeah.
But the point is, it's better than nothing, right? Without some kind of measure like that, we don't really have a number to say, people are willing to pay for these things. Because if you don't have a number, the number is zero, right? So it's just nice to show that actually some people might be willing to pay something. I'm not standing by the figures and saying, oh, this is exactly what their willingness to pay. I'm saying there's just a positive or negative or mixed preference for these non-use values.
Yes. We have three sort of similar interlinking comments on that basis. The first is, seems that we, as in scientists and conservationists, have some work to do to explain the benefits of natural capital. Somebody else says, not really a question, but just sharing that a lot of people have a really limited understanding of the role that different insects play in the ecosystem.
Absolutely.
And a slightly different angle on it might the skew towards negative words to describe insects come from us evolving alongside dangerous insects and so be somewhat innate to feel averse.
Interesting. Great range of questions. So starting with the last one, there is a book by a guy whose name I forget. It's like The Loathing Insect or some hating insect. It's something about why these kind of negative preferences arise. I'll just skip through to this. And there is that kind of, there must be that evolutionary reason, right, in terms of disease vectors or discomfort or inconvenience. Nowadays, there's probably less of that, but we're only human.
Yeah.
I really think there's interesting work to be done on why in the UK we call them creepy crawlies, which both of those things are somewhat negative valence, but that's what we call insects. I do think that makes a difference. And that's why we allow people at the start of the survey to just say, what do you think about insects? Don't worry about the spelling or the framing or anything. Just get it out there, say what you think, and then just see how that affects the preferences. And I think what we have is people who say they're creepy crawlies or they're scary or disease vectors. They might still want them to exist. I'm not saying that you should want to pay to interact with wasps, but I do think people have separate values for their existence and bequest. Could you repeat the first two parts of those interlinking questions? I've completely forgotten what they're about, but they were really valuable.
So too similar. Seems that we scientists and conservationists have some work to do to explain the benefits of natural capital, and very similar comment that a lot of people have a really limited understanding of the role that different insects play in the ecosystem.
Yeah. There was a guy in the comments who said, I've been an entomologist for 30 years. And then he came out in the survey as like really not willing to pay for any of this. So I think there is this heterogeneity. And we don't do a lot in the survey about, did you know that wasps are involved in pollination or pest regulation? Did you know that beetles are important for XYZ? But maybe we should have. Maybe that is something. I do think a nice facet of our work is just saying whether people know that or don't know that, or whether they're right or wrong or informed or misinformed or whatever, they might still be willing to pay for existence value and bequest value, right? I might not have any clue what a beetle does in its day-to-day. I might not see it. I might not interact with it. But I might be willing to pay for its long-term conservation, right? And I think it's nice to kind of unpack that. But the people who ask the questions are right. There's certainly some imperfect understanding of the ecosystem services provided by insects. But I hope this presentation is a step in the right direction for understanding what they do culturally.
I mean, my very small part in this work showed that even a lot of scientists aren't fully aware of the benefits of insects and ecosystem services because they couldn't necessarily demonstrate and quantify exactly how that works. So, yeah, maybe there's a much bigger piece of work to be done.
Period two.
Exactly.
Period two.
And I think actually, I'm just going to double check that nothing else has come in, but I think the last question that we have is simply that, could you please share the links to the survey again, as we'd be interested to take it and potentially explore further. If there's any links, you could put them in the chat as well directly, or email them to me and I can put them in the chat so that people can come back and find them.
Yes, that's a good question. So the survey as presented is not available, because that was through a survey research company, and I'm not about to steal their property. But how do I answer this one? The link that's on the screen right now is the wellbeing section of the talk. And all you do is you click on that, you go through the wellbeing questions exactly as they looked, and then you see what your well-being is compared to others.
I think because we're not in PowerPoint Live, we can't actually click this link.
Yeah,
so
me
if you'd
too.
be able to copy that into the chat, that would be very useful. I think there might be quite a few people who'd be interested in having a look.
Absolutely, absolutely. Let me. Yeah, I coded it up right before that, before one of the Druid meetings, before the project meeting, and then it crashed on the morning. And then it recovered. Like I was really excited. I went to people and said, "Hey, look, it's a really interesting thing. Due to organizational policy, the admin has turned off chat for external people. So I will email Tree.
Yes.
And Tree can distribute.
And I will share it in the chat for this call.
Yes. Yeah, but no, thanks for everyone for getting involved. It's been a really fascinating project.
My colleague Chiara has put a link in the chat. Thank you, Chiara.
Even better. Even better.
And that I think is actually perfect timing, because that has brought us to just nearly 5 to, so we can allow people to go and grab a cup of tea or whatever before their next meeting at 2 o'clock. So thank you everybody for coming along. Thank you very much to Peter. That was a fascinating talk, even for somebody who was involved in the periphery of this work. It was really interesting to dig back into it. So thank you very much for giving us a talk, and we may well invite you back in the future to tell us about
yeah, there might
be how all of this works out at the end.
Druid 2, we'll have some more stuff. But no, thank you for the time today. It's been fantastic, really good questions. And as I say, people are more than willing to get in touch with me or Tree about anything insects, but also anything non-use value. Yes.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Cheers.
Good luck with the paper, Peter. I'll be in touch.
Oh, that paper. I think it's ready to go. I think it's ready to go. I think it's good. But Martin's just doing it.
Do they have a timeline on getting back to you again with the next round of edits?
Oh, the D1. Hang on. Shall I do and check? Is that a good idea? Go and check the status of a submission.
Oh, that's always nerve-wracking.
So I resubmitted the revision on the 28th maybe.
Yes.
So I did it, and then Martin looked over it for a while, and then I kind of had to do a few last-minute tweaks, but we kind of got there in the end. So logging into Editorial Manager, and it says with the editor. Right. With the editor since getting back, or with the editors and they haven't checked the response? It doesn't. The point is,
I hate submitting papers. It's just.
It's a second round of revisions. I thought the comments were. I thought they were doable. I thought they were really doable.
There wasn't anything fundamental, was there? It was more.
No, not at all. Which is what I was scared of. I was like, I don't really know this, but they figured it out. Charlotte and Tom gave some really good stuff on conservation biocontrol, and I'm like, I don't even know what this is, but they had some good material. Yeah.
Well, fingers crossed it comes back positive fairly soon, because that will be my first publication, assuming they accept it.
Oh, that's exciting. That is. Well, it's ecosystem services. If they take long enough, you could leapfrog it, right? You could get something in before.
Well, I finally have what we think is a viable approach for my PhD paper. Nice. It's taken a long time to get there, but I'm in theory writing it up, in practice actually not having the energy to do it. But I
find the writing tasks you really need to kind of mentally have the energy to do it. You need to be like ready to get stuck in and reword a paragraph for 4 hours or whatever. But hey, the PhD's done, but it's passed review. The examiners liked it. Supervisors are done. The next, just submit as is. You'll be fine.
No, it's not ready for that yet.
Not ready.
But it will be. It will be ready.
Yeah. If you need any help on that, let me know. I will send some stuff. The problem with the GitHub is that I do have the code on there, and I do have the survey on there, and I actually had the data on there as well, but Martin was like, no, you can't do that. But I think it's fine. Yeah, he's doing all right. He's at
Imperial now, isn't he?
Yeah, and he was really busy. Like, so I passed the interview for this, and then they were like, "You start late July," and I was like, "Great, I'll do all the insect stuff and the stuff from before." And then he wasn't in for like the whole time, so I
Right.
was like, "What do I even do?" But yeah, he's got some really good comments and stuff. I don't know what he's up to. He's doing he's looking at this paper. I say that much. But we're kind of in a race to. I've got to send him a paper, or he'll send me one back, and I kind of don't want to have them. So I'm trying to get ahead of it. But
Right.
sometimes he wins that race, sometimes I do. So we'll see.
That's fair.
Anyway, it's 2 p.m. I should let you get on for lunch.
Same. I've got another meeting in 5 minutes. So
Oh,
lovely
damn.
to catch up.
Always a pleasure.
Yes.
And I'll let you know what ecosystem services say. And then you'll see this one. You'll see the paper. This paper is like.
Oh yes, almost done. You said. Yeah.
It's almost done. It's almost done.
I don't know if my colleague Ness is actually still there. Ness is another one of the members of our little teamlet who run the science talks, but I have a feeling she might actually have left her laptop. So she may well come back. And find
she's the smart one. Put the talk in the background. Have lunch.
Yeah.
Go and do that. Right. Lunchtime. Thank you, Tree.
Lovely to talk to you. Thank you. See you soon. Bye.